now that we have Kalen, and we're done with a lot of conversation, I'm going to go back to sort of the dungeon crawl. There's several sort of stages to this dungeon. This is the Death God's Vault. This door here is the door that Kalen was talking about that she couldn't open. So we're not going to mess with that just yet. There's an area over here which is locked, so we can't go that way. We're left with one direction, which is helpfully indicated on the map. And there are a couple of mummified priests here. They aren't really all that interesting in the sort of the grand scheme of dangerous enemies, but they do cast silence, which is sort of annoying. So I'm gonna make sure I summon something to help them. Nope, and they did succeed in silencing me. Though they have not succeeded in dispelling me. This is where having a weapon would be very useful. I'm just going to finish them off screen. The silence will wear off fairly quickly, and then I'll just kill them normally with my usual spells. The priests don't drop anything at all. There are these offering urns here, which include, essentially they have money in them. When you take the urn, you get attacked by a dread wraith. This is sort of a trend for this dungeon. Most of the things you loot here will spawn enemies. And the dread wraiths here are not particularly important. There are stronger versions on the lower floors, which are useful from a sort of farming standpoint. We'll get back to that. I'm not actually going to bother trying to essentially kill off all of these things. I'll get back to them, and I'll probably actually do a good portion of that off-screen, just because it's fairly boring, frankly. Notably, you can break the urns with spells, and it'll also summon the wraiths. So I'm just going to kill this guy off-screen and be right back. Alright, that was sort of tedious, but it's done. I'm going to walk down here and strike the gong. Unless you strike the gong, all these scribe guys are here, but you can't actually talk to them. So.
The scratching in the air. They are the spirits of the scribes, still penning Merkel's scriptures, even in death.
And the chief scribe here, he's not important from a standpoint of you don't have to talk to him, but he has some interesting things to say about the plot. And he says we are both the deceiver and the deceived. Well, thanks, that's a little cryptic. Maybe you could be a little more specific. He says, no, I can't. And he identifies himself as the chief scribe of Merkel, who, he'll explain who Merkel was, but more or less, Merkel was the old god of the dead who was kind of evil. He's been replaced by Kelemvor, who is more of a neutral god of the dead. And if you know Forgotten Realms lore, more or less the gods all, decided to come to the mortal realm and have a nice shooting match, and a bunch of them died in the process. So, hey, So it's kind of curious that this guy would still be working for a dead god. So, but more or less he said that he swore a vow, and he was therefore stuck. And more or less he says that he's been punished because he was supposed to stop somebody who was kind of trying to disturb the order of things. And so we can mention that he's talking about the Betrayer's Crusade, which if you remember that book way back in the beginning of the game, right in that first area, put it on our journal. And we can ask who the traitor was, and he identifies as Akachi, called by some the Betrayer. So that's a name we'll hear again. And, he can say, well, punishment seems appropriate, for considering he betrayed his faith, and that gives us a point of lawful. There are not very many points of lawful or chaos, and I think there are, maybe 5 of each in the game. There's not enough to actually change your alignment in law and chaos. So, we're going to ask him for directions, and he tells you that there's the High Priest held the key. But even though these guys are kind of the scribes of the dead, they don't know where he's going. So, we can ask about the Lamentations of the Dead, which is referred to in that book we found in the first ledger, in the first area. And he says it's down below somewhere. And, well, we're going to need the key. We're actually going to need several keys. And the first key we're going to get from a fight up here. The second key we're not going to get for quite a while. So we're going to have to come back to this place at some point. I'm going to pick them up off screen, but there are a bunch of scrolls lying around here. And so I'll do that and be right back. I also identified some items I found outside, one of which is this black robe of the Archmagi. I'm good, so I shouldn't be able to use it, but use magic device is good enough. The only thing it gives me that matters really is spell penetration, the feat, and there are some enemies around here with some spell resistance, so it's worth having. What's coming up here is a fairly interesting little fight, so I'm going to buff up and be right back. Okay. Now there are a bunch more urns here, so if you break those you're going to fight more of those spirits, and I'll do that off screen. They're kind of boring to watch. I mean, they're just sort of tedious fights. They're not dangerous at all. What are dangerous are these 3 Death Knights here. And when you talk to them, they more or less say, blah, 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 we're going to kill you. And that's nice. There are 3 of them here, which means that using Greater Missile Storm's not going to work that well. I don't really want to wake up all the other crap around here by hitting it with spells, so I'm going to actually still use the Missile Storms, but I'm going to try and fall back a little bit, see if I can get them to pay attention to my elemental. Because I don't care if it does. Unfortunately, they are, as you can see, the elemental is dead already, so they are not easy enemies. They're not, on the other hand, impossibly hard either. This is probably about as hard as the pirate fight. Unfortunately, since they're undead, they're immune to a lot of my spells as well, which is annoying, but not a problem, since a lot of my spells are really buffs rather than offensive spells, and the offensive spells I've chosen include things that are essentially specifically picked because they will not be resisted. So that's those guys. So I'm going to clean up and I'm going to fight all these. There are actually 6 urns here with stuff, and so I'll do that all that off screen. Other than some random money, there's a couple items that I picked up from those just urns and from the Death Knights, specifically the Death Knight's key, which is the first key I was talking about. The Death Knight leader also has this ring here, which is, I don't know if I'll use it or not. I may and I may not. Bone Dancer's ring. Essentially, it gives you immunity to death magic. It casts the Death Ward spell for you, and it also gives piercing and slashing resistance. It's fairly nice. You're still vulnerable to bludgeoning attacks, of course, and I can just cast Death Ward, but I don't know, it's one less spell to cast, so maybe I'll just use it. For a different character, that could be a much more important item. Now, as you can see, I've used up quite a few of my spells, so I'm going to gather up my party and rest before going into that next area. I'm probably going to have to fight off a couple waves of things as I do, but we'll just deal with that off screen. I forgot to mention these earlier, but there are these ancient mosaics here, and they depict the battle, and there's a figure in the battle that is apparently kind of important, has the Sword of Gith, which, we recognize. And Kalen identifies the guy holding the Sword of Gith as Akachi the Betrayer. I don't know. Maybe there's a connection here between us and him. We'll get back to that. And, yeah. we can keep looking at it, and it's not really clear who's supposed to be fighting with who. Apparently there are humans on the side of the devils, and there are also humans opposing the devils. The sword bearer is supposedly fighting against the devils, but there's also a dragon, celestials, and it's very sort of a strange, it doesn't fall into the usual categories. Anyway, there's nothing important there, just a piece of the puzzle, perhaps. Now that we have the Death Knight's key, we can go through this door over here. The Death Knight's key disappears when you do. And there are a bunch more mummies, and there are all these skeletal remains around here. When you pick up the stuff from the skeletal remains, nothing particularly interesting happens, but I'm going to break them all just so I know when I've picked it up. I'm going to fight all these priests off screen just because they're kind of boring. There was also one more urn in that room, so I killed that and cleared that out of the way. There's some random loot through that area. None of it's very good. There's a Stone Eater's Ring, which casts flesh to stone. I'm not really aware of any enemies that petrify you in this game, so I don't know why they bothered to include it.
The sounds you hear, they are born of ghosts. Do not let them distract you.
Anyway, there's a furnace over here. And, there are rather a lot of cremated spirits and dread wraiths and all that sort of fun stuff. So I'm going to leave them for the next video, because this may be a fairly long fight. Inside the house, there are more Death Knights. I don't know what they're doing here, but they don't appear to be hostile yet. There are a bunch of items you can look at. There's Halari's Revenge List, and the one really entry stands out about Varanin. Okay. There's Halari's Journal, which more or less says, you're talking about Varanin, and he's saying, well, he likes it here in Mulsandir, but he's moved over to the Plane of Shadows, and he talks about a tome he needs from the Death God's Vault, and he refuses to go in there. And he apparently summons some servants to watch over him, so presumably that's talking about the Death Knights. His corpse is here. And, well, let's not mess with it just yet. There's, over behind the knight here, there's an open book with sort of three options. You can prepare a phylactery, and you can... Well, it says more or less it's a complicated rite. And the third entry requires the destruction of the phylactery, and more or less says that, well, they'll die. Here's the phylactery. Let's see what we can do with Halari. And you could use the alternate ritual to release the soul from the phylactery. You can try to complete the ritual, or you can just smash the head. Smashing the head doesn't do anything. Let's try releasing him from his torment. And Sophia says she knows what she's doing with this, and unless you really want to, you can just let her do it. And that gives you influence with Sophia. And that makes another point of good and another point of lawful, and the guys just go away. You can also try and complete it and screw up, more or less, and they'll attack you. Nothing important. He drops an amulet, which is a talisman of pure good. I'm actually going to use this just because I need a small wisdom bonus, and the charisma bonus is higher than the charisma bonus I've got, so why not? We'll cut this video short here, and see you next time.